It's time to start, and we're having trouble with our team lead for today, but the other panelists are all on. Today we're talking about the Manitoba Genealogical Society research team, and I realized it was cutting off our library behind us. The MGS library has one of the best collections of local history books for Manitoba. And we also on Thursdays have a team of people that come in to do paid research for clients that are wanting someone to look information up for them. Jim Rutherford is the chair of that committee, and he's currently having trouble getting connected from up on Lake Winnipeg. So what I said I would do is get things started, pardon me, and so that we can move through, because it's a busy day with a lot of things happening. The research team is made up of a number of individuals that together have a vast knowledge about researching Manitoba. And we're going to step through each of them one by one during this presentation. And they're going to tell you a bit about some of the things they do and some of the successes they've had. So I'll pass it over to Bonnie Batchelor to start with. Bonnie.
Hello. Thank you for joining the Manitoba Genealogy Society research team presentation. I am Bonnie Batchelor, as Gord has already introduced me, and I look after the front desk on the Thursdays when the researchers are in-house. My first introduction to genealogy was so long ago that it didn't even have a name and wasn't considered a hobby. It was just called knowing who your family was. My hometown is Newbro, Ontario, so I am not from Manitoba, although I've lived here for about 30 years, thanks to my husband and his job. Newbro is a small village on the Rideau Canal. The canal was built between 1826 and 1832 and runs between Kingston and Ottawa. In my grade 8 history class in our small 2-room school, our teacher told us that there were gravestones in one of the local cemeteries for some of the workers who had died during the building of the canal. And as part of our homework, we were to go to the cemetery and transcribe the names of these workers from the headstones. Now, you can imagine how thrilled a bunch of grade 8, 13-year-olds were at this homework assignment. I went to the cemetery with my paper and pencil, grudgingly, I might add, and I had to search around to find the headstone because this was a cemetery that was no longer in use and was rather overgrown and messy looking. But during my wanderings, I found a couple of headstones that had my family's surname on them. Now, this cemetery, the religious affiliation wasn't what my family currently adhered to. So it sort of piqued my interest of why would my family name be appearing in this cemetery. I went home and asked my parents who these people were. And of course, their answer was, oh, it's just a bunch of dead people. I sort of figured that out on my own, but anyways, it didn't help me to know who these people were. And so I started, asking around to other relatives and trying to piece my family history together. Well, it's almost 60 years later, and I'm still at it. So I guess you could say I sort of got hooked on it. Of course, there were large gaps of many years in the last 60 years where I didn't work on it, sort of put it on the shelf as I raised a family, but I always came back to it. Now, the Manitoba Genealogy Society has many resources to help anyone that is looking to research their family tree. When you come through the front door, come to visit us, I will be there to try to help you to the best of my ability, while the researchers are busy working on their individual jobs. Now, we on the research team don't make a completed family tree and hand it over to you in book form. We are there to help you do your own research, to provide guidance, to suggest places that you could search, places that you could look, to give you the benefit of whatever expertise we may have. I usually start by giving our guests a quick tour of our facilities, to sort of, give them a idea of what we may have as far as resources. We have a number of computers that are available to our visitors. On these, you can access the very popular Ancestry.com website, Manitoba Genealogy Society's own Manny, our Koha system, newsletters and magazines from all the genealogy societies worldwide, the Family Search website, Library and Archives Canada, and Manitoba Vital Stats that will give you births, deaths, marriages, and also newspaper archives. Now, some of our research team that follow me in this talk will be giving a description of some of these resources. Another much used resource that we have are transcriptions of over 1,000 cemeteries in Manitoba. Now, some of the tombstones are very weathered and you can no longer read the writing on it. So having these transcriptions, which have been done over decades, really, it's invaluable, really. Excuse me while I reach for my notes here, my cheat sheets. We also have copies of the Henderson directories in both books and some of them on microfilm. There are also many maps in our collection that can help you pinpoint a long-lost village or town. One binder, for example, contains the maps which show the layout of the rural municipalities, giving the sections, townships, ranges, so you could narrow down exactly where your rural ancestor lived. Of course, we have a wonderful selection of books, some of which you could see behind Gord in his introduction. The largest number of books obviously concentrate on Manitoba, but we have shelves covering the rest of Canada, the US, the British Isles, Europe. I believe one of our other speakers actually has some numbers of books just to show you the magnitude of our collection. Now, as a member of MGS, you can borrow these books for a 3-week period, the same as you would in any city library. Now, I also like to sit down with our visitors and go over what information they actually have, if any, and what they are looking for. Now, some people have a great deal of information. Some people have almost none. So you have to start with what you have and work backwards. All you really need to get started is a piece of paper and a pencil. And I stress pencil versus pen because obviously there will be a few erasures along the way. So you start with what you know. You start with your parents. You write down their full names, their dates of birth, marriage, death, if they are no longer with us. Anything that you know about them, or if you have any records, you have their marriage certificate, for example, would give you, the names of the witnesses, which often are family members. So have everything that you know about your parents. Then you go back one generation to your grandparents. You do the same thing for them. Plus, you write down the names of all their other children, which would be your aunts and uncles. And you go back then one generation further to your great-grandparents. And you keep doing this until you reach the point where you no longer have any information available. This allows you to see where the gaps are. It also allows you to have a list of people that you may be able to go to, your relatives, your aunts and your uncles, your cousins, people that may be able to provide you with more information. I also like to do a quick drawing of your family tree called a Pedigree Chart. It's just a straight line drawing, very simple. You don't have to be, a great artist to do this. It's just a few lines and fill in the names. And again, it gives you, a lot of people are visual people. If you can see something, you can understand it better. But that's the starting point. What do you have? What do you know? What do you need? Now, at that point, I have an idea of what you're looking for, or where we can help you. A lot of times I'll move you to one of our computers, get you set up on that. Now, some people have a lot of computer experience. Some people have very little. Again, that's what we are there to help you with, whatever we can do to assist you. But as I said earlier, we are there to help you, not do it for you. So we'll get you started. We can find books for you. As I said, we have an extensive library collection, and you are off and running, hopefully. Now, in addition to working with visitors, I try my best to help our researchers who work very hard and do a wonderful job. Anything I can do to assist them, from finding books that they're looking for, to making copies, to doing odd little bits of research for them. That is my job and my joy, to work on the Thursdays at the Genealogy Center, to help in any way that I can. And I hope that the people watching this, if you haven't already been into the Genealogy Center, that you do come and visit us. We would love to see you. You are the reason that we are there to spread the interests in genealogy research. And I do hope that you will come and visit us. And thank you again for watching our program. I'll turn it back over to Gord.
Oh, thanks, Bonnie. Jim's still having a problem getting connected. So without taking up a lot of time, the next one up on his list, he said, was Sheila. So I hope Sheila's not too shocked by that. So I'll pass it over to Sheila, one of the other researchers.
Okay, thank you, Bonnie. That was a wonderful introduction to what we do and to our center. I will be somewhat brief, I think. I've been asked to say how I got interested in genealogy and then talk a bit about some of the cases I've worked on and some of the resources I've used. I've been looking into my family and my husband's family for certainly over 20 years. I used to go and look at microfilm one evening a week while my husband curled. Just before I retired, I heard an announcement on the radio about MGS having an open house. And I'd never heard of MGS, but I thought, oh, I better go. And I was greeted by someone I already knew, which surprised me, but Winnipeg's like that. She asked me what my research interests were. And then she pulled out a book of Ontario baptisms. And there were the baptisms of my husband's great-grandfather's two oldest siblings. Now, I had already found the rest of the family baptized at a different community not far away. So this completed the family, and I thought, oh, that's wonderful. So I joined right away. And then a few years later, maybe 3 or 4 years later, I decided I wanted to volunteer. And at that point, the research team had an opening. And well, let's say I love puzzles and I love figuring things out. And so I thought that was a wonderful fit for me. Okay, so now I'll just say a little bit about some of the work I do or have done recently. Our clients and the people they're researching come from a wide variety of backgrounds. There has to be a Manitoba connection, but some involve Métis research, and I'd like to say a little bit about that. We don't do the official genealogy that you need for joining the Manitoba Métis Federation. That's a pretty bare bones thing as far as we're concerned, because it just has to show your connection to the Métis community. But if you are interested in finding a lot more about your Métis family, we can certainly do that. We have resources in our library, and we're also quite familiar with a lot of online resources to help us do that. And I've worked on a number of files that involve Métis research. Now I'll move on to something else. One source that we use quite a lot, and I think it's been mentioned already, is newspapers. One client we had wasn't researching a family member, but he was researching an Anglican minister with ties to St. John's College who lived in Winnipeg. Now, so the newspapers were full of stories of meetings he's attended, speeches he'd made, things like that. Then he inherited an estate in Ireland. And so I looked at Irish newspapers as well. And again, there were stories of meetings he'd attended and speeches he'd made. And also a letter to the editor of an Irish newspaper that actually several other newspapers picked up. So that was really interesting to find out about him. And one more, also involving newspapers. This was a few years ago. A client's mother had been born in Manitoba, but she was adopted in the United States. And he wanted to try and make contact with her birth family. First thing I found, well, once I figured out which family it was, I found a 50th wedding anniversary write-up for his mother's youngest sister. And that gave the names of some family members. And then it's really rather sad, but a few years later, there was an obituary for her oldest son, and he had died quite young. He was only in his early 50s. But that was what provided the information so that my client was able to contact some of his mother's relatives, and so he was quite pleased about that. So I think that's about all I have to say. So I'll turn it over to Gord. I guess Gord's on the phone now, but I'll turn it back to Gord and he can help me move on. Thank you.
Hello. Perhaps I should begin. I was next after Sheila, so it's Kathy. I'm Kathleen. And I want to say that family secrets have a way of making future genealogists. So years ago, my mom disclosed that my father's half-sister had been murdered by her husband, but we were not to talk about it. Unfortunately, my parents, both of them died quite young, so those things were never answered. So when I retired and I'd finished getting rid of all the clothing from my closet for work, that sort of thing, I discovered a family history chart authored by a cousin in Winnipeg who was related to my father's mother's family. Never knew he existed, but we got together and we exchanged stories, and we also, photos, things like that. But most importantly, he gave me a data disk of Family Tree Maker. All I had to do was pick up some Family Tree Maker software, and I had that family's history back to Scotland. So I've had to do very little research in that direction. But of course, at that time, I was hungry for information on genealogy. I was going to the library and pulling out all the books they had on how to research. And I was listening to podcasts given by Lisa Louise Cook. So I remembered that my husband was a foster child, and years before, we had gone to the Manitoba Genealogical Society to find out information, how to research his missing mother, birth mother. And they'd suggested the Henderson directories, and also that he should order up his long form birth certificate. We did that with some success. So I went to the MGS to take out a membership, and also took out a membership in the branch, which had twice monthly Monday night meetings where I met Sheila. And Sheila happened to mention to me that the research group got together on Thursdays. And I thought, research for somebody else? You know, that's a great way to expand one's horizons, take one out of the comfort level. So next Thursday, I showed up. And Jim, our missing leader here, he gave me a file. And I think my first file was from people in Europe who were looking for descendants of their ancestor who'd emigrated to Winnipeg. And I was able to put them in touch with descendants, so that was very happy. But the next file that I had was a little bit more sad, shall we say. It had to do with Swedish people who were in correspondence with their relatives who had emigrated years and years before to South Dakota. But one of their family members had gone north to Manitoba, I think when his marriage broke up. And this was in 1907. So the South Dakota relatives mentioned in their letter, and these letters were received both in Swedish and the translation, I should say, they mentioned that their ancestor who'd gone to Manitoba had died in November 1907. But the way they expressed it was kind of strange and vague, like as if there was a mystery involved, even through the translation. So it turned out he'd gone to Manitoba into an area that was very remote. And there wasn't much there, even of a municipality at the time. And the Manitoba vital statistics had nothing at all about a death, even following an exhaustive research. And the area was policed by the Northwest Mounted Police at the time. He'd come late in the summer, not enough time to set up anything more than a barn. And there wasn't many residents, few contacts. So the story unfolded when I checked newspapers. And newspapers in Winnipeg, Regina, Alberta told the story. Apparently, a local had found him hanging from a rafter in the barn, and there was no food around. The Northwest Mounted Police had only a statistical mention of a suicide in November 1907. And I even inquired at the medical examiner's office, and they had no details further on the subject. So I had to write up a detailed report to the Swedish relatives explaining my findings and my conclusion on the matter. Unfortunately enough, they did agree with my conclusion. On closing, because we're in a time frame here, I want to mention that it is often difficult to determine what a client is requesting. We have to establish the research question. And we do our very best to find something for a client. And I also like to conclude my report by suggesting other lines of research that the person can take if we haven't been able to access or get to those findings herself. So without further ado, I'll put you on maybe to Rick. Thank you and have a good day.
Thanks, Kathleen. Rick is up next.
Hey,
Oh, there he is.
good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Like many of the people who have spoken already, my introduction to genealogy began when I was asked a couple questions about a family member, and I really didn't have the answers, and I was curious, puzzled. I knew very little about my past generations of relatives that all were from Ontario, and their stories and their life stories. So I was working with my family history now for about 20 years. And some of the early research I did, some of the early connections were through the MGS, and specifically through our host here today, Gord, at the Scottish Pavilion during Folklorama. I used to drop over to the MGS booth and ask him questions and some of the other volunteers that were there. When I retired, I was able to devote more time to my family history, and I decided I should do some volunteering at the MGS. I started doing some cemetery transcriptions. I thought it was important to kind of learn a little bit about this source of information, and then I moved on to the research team. I spent most of my career as a librarian providing customer service and helping the public find information that they needed. And it seemed like a really good fit to be on the research team, where that's exactly what we're doing. We're trying to help the general public to come in or send us questions online. And you know, Kathy's touched on this too. I try to tackle each question the same way at the beginning by trying to develop a bit of a research plan. I ask the client questions. We try to clarify or at least focus in on exactly what it is they're looking for. It can be a wide amount of information, very little information. And I don't want to head off in a direction they don't want me to follow. I don't want to head off in a direction that they may know a lot about already. One of the things I have learned, though, is that sometimes the client, what they believe they have as fact, is sometimes more like family lore or rumor. So I try not to assume that the information I get originally is accurate until I can verify that. And I think after that, I then start to look for sources. And certainly right now in this COVID world, you look for online sources, and then I start my research and work from a theory from there. I think maybe Sheila mentioned that we're a bit like detectives. We interview, we find clues, we develop theories. Hopefully we solve a puzzle, or at least point people in that right direction. And I had a couple examples to share with you. The first one was about the passing of an estranged father from a family and a search for two stepbrothers put up for adoption. The client knew that the father had a German roots in his family, but he didn't know why his last name was English. They were also interested in their mother, their stepfather's family. They basically wanted everything. They basically had very little family history. And so we, through email, agreed that, really we should just focus on the father's side. There really was too much for the 6 hours that we can devote for our research. I explained the adoption protocols in Manitoba, and I pointed the client in that direction for the stepbrothers. I also suggested that DNA might end up being a way at it. The client knew that their father had died in Saskatchewan, and through the funeral home records in Estevan, Saskatchewan, I was able to track down the father. And through a little bit of serendipity, the grandfather's records were there also. He had died relatively close to the father's death. Using newspaper archives, I was able to track down the grandfather's life in Selkirk, Manitoba, where he was a local politician. There was lots of information, lots of social history, pictures, articles, obits. And the obit led to another generation where there were German last names for the great-grandparents. I was able to confirm their death certificates through Manitoba Vital Stats. And then I used Manny to find where the MGS's Manny to find where the location of the cemetery was, and Find a Grave Canada to actually come up with some images of the grave site. I should say Manny, our Manitoba Name Index, is a great resource for cemetery records, obit information, local history books linked to our MGS collection, and much, much more that you could spend a whole workshop on. There's 1.25 million records in it, and it grows daily, and it's all a result of the work of the volunteers of MGS, and it's a great benefit of your membership. In terms of why the family name was German, again, some serendipity came into play. I was searching through the grandfather's military records, and I found that he was enlisted from Winnipeg and went overseas, but there was an amazing, remarkable legal note document in his file that he signed, changing his name because his parents back in Winnipeg had requested a name change. And the letter told the story of how his parents were being harassed on the streets of Winnipeg because they had a German name. And so that was the reason that the name was changed. To find that document was quite incredible. The client was very pleased. I provided that military record link through Library and Archives Canada. And I guess the moral of the story on that one is that sometimes as researchers, we do get a little lucky too, and we get people pointed in the right direction. The second example I had was a client from England, had very little information on the family. Some of it they had was incorrect and a lot of questions. They're trying to find out why the family came to Canada in the early 1900s. I was able to find through Library and Archives Canada, the client's grandparents came shortly after their marriage to start a family. And through Vital Stats, I was able to show the client that a couple of the uncles that they knew of were actually born in Manitoba, and they thought they had been born in the UK. In fact, they were sure they had been born in the UK. I also found through LAC the passenger records for the family leaving Canada in 1915 and where they moved to in the UK. Of course, that was in the record. And this was a real breakthrough. It confirmed for the family them coming to Canada, It confirmed the time frame involved and a link to another generation of the family by the address of where they ended up back in the UK. The client was really uncertain, though, as to why the grandfather didn't follow the family back. And I guess my working theory was that he probably enlisted here in Winnipeg. And the client was sure he had not enlisted. He was not in the First World War, just the brother. I had confirmed through the Commonwealth War Grave Commission that the brother had actually enlisted and had been killed in India. But I also found through Library and Archives Canada the attestation papers for the father, the grandfather, and he had enlisted in Winnipeg. And this was a major surprise to the family. The tough part, though, was trying to find out why they came to Canada. Social history is often very difficult to determine unless you have some direct family records and you have some biography information, a diary, something like that. In this case, there was nothing that could help me through newspaper archives, but Henderson directories, I was able to find a brother here in Winnipeg and his address. I even tried to find the house where he and this grandfather had lived for a while, but it had long since been torn down. I guess in the end, the best I could say for the family was that maybe they moved here because a relative lived here, and Winnipeg in the early 1900s was a bit of a boom town, and maybe a good place to come to start a family. So sometimes we can't answer all the questions, but we do point them in the direction of certain resources and or point them in new leads, and that at least helps them. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Rick. I believe Bob is up next.
Gord, looks like we're going to have some time at the end for questions. Would you like to first just talk about how the participants can ask questions, and then they can start entering some while I'm speaking?
Okay, good. Yeah, normally I cover that at the beginning. Thanks for reminding me. I sort of got thrown for a loop with Jim not being able to get connected. The way that the webinar platform on Zoom differs from the email platform is that the panelists get to have their camera and microphone on, but the rest of you don't. So one of the options, if you scroll to the bottom, you have the your mouse. If it doesn't show up right away, you will see buttons that pop up. One of the options, and I have to make my screen bigger, is the open the chat window. And if you notice if you go across, if you don't see it, click on the more button, and in the more there'll be a link to open the chat window. And people have already mentioned or put up a few questions. So after Bob speaks, if you type in your questions, I'll read out those questions and pose them to the panelists so that people can get the questions answered or address the panelists. So we'll go on with Bob, and then at the end, we'll have a question and answer period. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, Gord. Hi, I'm the latest addition to the MGS Research Team. My name is Bob Alabone. My wife and I have lived in Manitoba since we moved here in 1979 from Nova Scotia. I grew up in Cornwall, Ontario, and she grew up in New Glasgow, Nova Scotia. She can trace her ancestors back to 5 Douglas brothers who were among the original Nova Scotia settlers from Scotland. Unfortunately, both of my parents died before I reached the age where a person would typically be asking their parents the question, so where were my ancestors from? Now, I knew my mother's family were from Lancashire, England, but I did not know who they were. I knew my father's family were from Montreal and had emigrated from somewhere in England. That's all I knew. I felt like a leaf that was not attached to a tree. That is what propelled me into family genealogy about 20 years ago, to try to find out who my ancestors were and where they were from. Now, I reached a point just a few years ago where I thought I was a really good researcher. But when you have that conversation with yourself, with no one to compare to, you can be wrong. Because you see, you don't know what you don't know. Or in other words, when you always work alone in genealogy, you don't know what you are missing. So I joined the MGS, the Manitoba Genealogical Society, in August of 2019 and started attending the local branch's educational events where you meet other people, you rub shoulders with other family genealogists, share ideas and research strategies. And that's where I really started to learn a lot more about genealogy. And then I applied to be part of the research team because I wanted to participate and help others, but I also wished to learn what I was missing in terms of research strategies. Now, I was lucky since Jim Rutherford, our chairman of our committee, accepted me onto the team. And it has been a very rewarding and educational experience ever since. Now, as you have heard so far, each member of our team has been highlighting resources we have access to that help us in our research. And you may be able to use some of these same research strategies. We have very useful online software, as Bonnie was mentioning, on the computers at the MGS Resource Center, being in particular a library edition of Ancestry, which is similar to the World Deluxe membership level at Ancestry. The only difference is that you cannot create and retain a family tree on the library edition. You can do all the research, though, that you wish. And we also have one subscription to the international version of, and I want to emphasize that, it is an international version of newspaperarchive.com, which includes an extraordinary archive of Manitoba newspapers, especially the Winnipeg Free Press from 1872 to 2021. Now, in my experience, having seen hundreds of trees on Ancestry over the years created by other people, very few members of at least Ancestry use archive newspapers to fill in the gaps between birth and marriage and death. There is much more to learning about an individual and your family than just birth, marriage, and death. And newspaper archives can help you fill in those gaps to find out what their activities were in those periods of times, their interests, whether they were involved in civic duties, whether they were involved in the military. Using archived newspapers can really help you understand the life of your ancestors and make it more real to you. But there's much more to the MGS Resource Center than computers. What's really important is what you see when you walk in the door. Books, lots of books. On the topic of genealogy, our library is certain to be the source for many of the answers you have been searching for. One of the first client inquiries I saw after joining the research team was given to both Rick Walker and myself to work on. The inquiry pertained to a family that lived many years ago in a small town in Manitoba. Well, within minutes, Rick Walker, using our online catalog of books, found one that focused on the small town in which the family had lived. Remember that one, Rick? Upon closer examination, he came upon a few pages that actually talked about the family at the focus of the inquiry. So that day I learned, never assume that our MGS library does not have a book on the subject you wish to investigate. Always look using our searchable catalog of books, which you can access on the MGS website, even if you're not a member. You may be amazed at what you find. And by the way, did you know that the MGS library has over 10,000 items in it? Another inquiry I handled about a year ago involved a genealogist in England who was building a family tree for a client. She found in her research in England that a member of the family had emigrated to Winnipeg and during the First World War had fought as a member of the 27th Battalion of the Canadian Infantry, known as the Winnipeg Battalion. The ancestor had been a private, and the genealogist in England wondered whether we could find a photo of him. Well, a photo of a private could not be located. But in our MGS library, I found, to my amazement, using the online catalog, a book, all of which was devoted to just this battalion, in which there were many pictures of the officers and the troops. And the pictures that I sent her made her very happy that she could pass them along to the client. Now, to help illustrate the diversity and quantity of the information both we find and you will find in our library, I carried out a search a few days ago to find out how many books or documents mention the name of a Manitoba ethnic group in its title or description. Here are the MGS collections I found on ethnic groups. Galicia or Galician in the title or description, there were 26 books or documents. Iceland or Icelandic, 57 books or documents. The Métis, 74. Indigenous, there are over 100 books or documents. Mennonite, 170. Ukrainian, 278 books or documents. And Scotland or Scottish, 392 books or documents. So, if you have been looking for historic or genealogical information on one of those groups, we may have a book or document that will be of use to you. Think of the MGS Resource Center as an adult theme park for family genealogists. If you live outside of Winnipeg, consider a day excursion to visit and come prepared with information on a few ancestors you wish to research. But plan ahead by using our online library called KOHA, that's KOHA, to find books or documents that may hold the information you are looking for. The local branch of MGS plans to staff the Resource Center on 2 Saturdays per month, probably starting in the fall. So keep an eye on the MGS website during the summer for news of these fall Saturday openings. MGS also, when we are open, also staffs the Resource Center on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. But if you hit a brick wall and you're not making any progress with a particular ancestor, we on the research team may be able to help you. Thank you for tuning in today, and now I'll turn it back to Gord and see what questions we may have from you that the group of us might be able to answer.
Unmute myself here. I was just looking at some of the questions. One of them, the question is, can you highlight the resources that Manny searches? Do you want me just to go over that, Bob, or?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. Manny is a combination of all of our previous, to use the term loosely, databases. Some of these were access databases that included our cemetery listings, Others were down to being 1 or 2 pages in a dual tang folder that someone typed on a manual typewriter, and everything in between. We even had some that were typed on a line printer out at the University of Manitoba in the days of the mainframe. In total, there's about 80 different sources that we started with, and we've combined or moved most of those into Mani. There's a couple that we haven't yet because of a contractual issue with the person or the organization that owns the content. So we have all this information, and it's growing daily. We have one person that's doing an amazing job at updating all of the cemetery transcripts, because eventually all of the information that's in all of our cemetery transcript booklets will be entered into Mani, which will then allow us to quickly update a cemetery listing by pushing a button, and it will print a new update in a minute, as opposed to taking someone a couple of weeks to type it. So some of those larger databases that I mentioned, we have our cemetery transcription database that we've over 45 years transcribed cemeteries across the province. Our branches in Nipawin, Dauphin, and Brandon and Winnipeg over the years have gone out as teams and also researched or recorded cemeteries in each of their areas. We have census transcripts from the earliest days of Manitoba before it was a province, and through to the late 1800s. And then after that, they're online, so they're easily searchable. We have Jim Rutherford also does the Winnipeg obituaries. So he goes through all of the Winnipeg obituaries and records the vital information about individuals. If you look at the name, it's a Manitoba Name Index. And what that means is it's an index or finding aid. So it may not always have all of the information you have, but it definitely but it definitely gets you pointed in the right direction. One of the processes we're currently starting to move toward with an upgrade of Mani is the ability to link to additional information. So we have a newer feature that was added a couple of years back now, which is called source search. And the idea of source search is that if you find something that's listed as coming from the Nipawin rocket, or I don't know if that's a paper or not, but we'll call it that. So you would be able to click on a link and get the history of that newspaper. Some newspapers in some towns only lasted a year before they were bought out or merged with a rival newspaper. So trying to find all that history, there's no use trying to search for an event in a newspaper if it's not published during that period. So the idea is to bring the expertise of say, our group in the research group into putting it online so that people can get some of the information that the researchers have in their heads or have at their disposal. So we're constantly trying to improve Mani. We also have rural newspaper birth, marriage, and death event, and several other indexing projects that were unique to Manitoba. So a lot of our local history books were produced without indexes. So we've had over all of our existence, many volunteers that have gone in and indexed local history books that didn't have an all name index. And now you can find that your family name was in there. One example of that is my McBains. I had lost one of them. And I know it's a bad thing for a genealogist to lose a person. So eventually it popped up in Mani because someone had indexed a book that I had no idea that they had lived in Nipawin for a while. So that type of thing, it helps you as a researcher find or directs you in the right direction for research. Bob?
Gord, I know something that Jim wanted to talk about if he was with us was the fee structure for the researching. I wonder if Bonnie or Rick could talk about that.
Bonnie, do you want to take that one or?
No, you can go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we do have a fee that we charge for research questions, in-depth research questions. It's $75, and that gets you 6 hours of research. And we jokingly say it's kind of a minimum 6 hours of research because, like most genealogy people, we're all passionate about what we do, and so I think you get a really good value for that dollar, is what I would say. Because we want to try to make sure that if we can, we'll help you find the answers you need. If we can't, we'll certainly point you in the direction of certain resources that can further your research, or we'll point you to other organizations, other agencies, where you might be able to get further information. So we do try to do our best to answer your questions and or help you along on your genealogical journey.
May I add something to that?
Absolutely.
If you're an MGS member, it's only $60, not $75. And the other thing I'd like to say is that Manny you can access, if you are an MGS member, you can access Manny from home. Non-members can access Manny, but they don't get to see the results. They only get to see counts of their search results. That's all I have to say.
And one addition to that is also the research request form is available from our website for anyone. It's not restricted to members, and it automatically applies a membership discount if you log in as a user in Manny and then use the research form. One question. Oh, you have another comment?
No.
Okay. One question that I just noticed here is, are you actively meeting with the public on Thursdays? What are the COVID restrictions? Do you need to be a member? And what time frame is membership? So there's several questions there. To start with, are we actively open on Thursdays? And not currently. The MGS executive is actively monitoring the provincial guidelines, and they're waiting at this point, or looking towards opening, but like a lot of businesses, we don't want to be opening and closing and opening and closing. So they're looking towards the probably the code orange before we would be opening with some restrictions, obviously, being the number of people, the biggest one. So we would have to restrict number of volunteers working that day and making sure we had openings for individuals. Do you need to be a member? No, there is a day use fee that non-members can come in and use our research center. And in terms of time frame for membership, our memberships run for 1 year from the date you join, the end of the month of the date you join. There was a question about recordings of this site. The plan for the recording on this one is to divide up the presentation and package it and put it on our YouTube channel, that people would be able to listen to the individual presentations and add some additional information to it. So that was one of the things I talked to Jim Rutherford about, and we haven't got the permission of all of the presenters yet. So given that, we will go ahead and package it and make it available on our website. And I'm looking if there's no more questions. We have another session starting in 9 minutes, so we have to log off and get ready for that session. I really want to thank the MGS research crew for putting this together. Unfortunately, Jim could not get connected for whatever reason. He kept getting network issues and network errors out where he is at Winnipeg Beach. So hopefully everyone has a better understanding of both the research that can be done in Manitoba, some of the techniques our researchers use, as well as what the MGS Research Service offers you as a patron if you choose to use that service. So again, thank you very much to all the presenters, and those of you attending another session, you'll have to log out and log back into the link for the next session. So without further ado, thanks all for attending and thanks for your time.